Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Fresh Natural Live. I'm here live from Houston, Texas, and we're going to have a nice little discussion on issues related to, I hate to use the F word, but fraud in medical research. I came across this article regarding Department of Justice criminal inquiry into an Alzheimer's drug research. And so it made me reflect on, a lot of issues that we deal with in medical research. And, I'm not going to bring up certain, drugs that are recently used in certain, worldwide illnesses, but, it really came to fruition when we started dealing with some of these issues. And so what I'd like to do is open up with a discussion about this research inquiry. But what I want to do is invite my colleagues to join in, and we want to share our insight on this topic. And I think it's something that you really should have insight to, because many of the decisions that are made by the healthcare practitioners who are, taking care of you, working hard, is based on research that's coming from these sources. So let's sit back, get your pen and pencil ready. I think you're going to get a lot of good information tonight. Okay, good evening again. And as I said, we're going to be talking about research and questions of fraud. As we get started, I want to remind you to hit the thumbs up button, the like button, and also share this information because many of your friends and family members and colleagues will benefit from the things we're about to say today. I know that for a fact, even before we say it. So hit the share and the subscribe if you hadn't had time to do so. I am delighted to invite my special guests, friends, and colleagues on tonight. We have Dr. Celeste Palmer. Dr. Palmer, how are you doing?
I'm good.
You're saving lives in the pediatric world. How are things there?
It's busy because it's the beginning of the school year.
Okay.
But good.
Well, hold down the flood of people headed my way as they get older. Dr. Atkins, how are you doing, sir?
I am doing wonderful today. How are you?
Just fine, just fine. There's a rumor that you're in the States. Is that true?
The United States of America.
All right. Welcome home. Well, anyway, as I said in the outset, we're going to talk about a Department of Justice criminal inquiry into Alzheimer's drug research. I'm really going to talk about this article, which is not going to be the core of what we talk about. This is what, as I understand it, an opening and ongoing investigation. But the reason I'm using this article really as an entry to an overall discussion I'd like to have tonight with you and of course, the audience about this whole issue of medical fraud. We're probably going to take a poll. In fact, I'd like to take a poll with the people in the chat right now, and I'll sort of ask for repeat votes throughout. And Dr. Palmer, help me keep track of the number of thumbs up and thumbs down that we get. I think we can do a thumbs up and thumbs down option on this. Do we have a thumbs up, thumbs down option on the reaction here? Okay, I'll tell you what, we'll do a number one, number two. So for those of you who, and we're going to, before we even say anything, I shouldn't have even given the title of the talk. But anyway, for those of you who have greater than 50% trust in the, Pat, you're voting too early, in the pharmaceutical research, the big pharma drug research, the research that comes from these new drugs and medical device. So medical device and medical drugs, if you have greater than 50% trust that it's legitimate, not fraudulent, given number one. If you have less than 50% trust that it's not fraudulent or shady in any way, given number two. So favorable, number one, not favorable research, lack of trust, number 2. And just vote only once if you will, please. And Dr. Palmer, if you kind of keep score for us as we go through, and if you can try to vote before we start talking. So favorable is number 1 and not favorable is number 2. Okay. So anyway, so there we have our early voters. And one thing, Common Counselor had opened up with this, bomber of a question that I don't know the answer to, but do nursing homes get money for data sent to the research and therefore hide what they're doing to people? Now, I guess they will hide the bad things and not hide the good things, but I don't know if that's true. And I don't know, any of you, are y'all aware of what nursing homes do, Florida Celeste, in terms of
No,
research?
I think they may, if they can enroll their clients in some kind of clinical trial for a drug study, that's the only way they would get money. I don't know any other way other than that.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Drug studies are probably either way, but that probably feeds into what we're going to talk about now. So let me just share my screen. I've got a couple of little PDFs with some highlighted things. So basically, the U.S. Department of Justice reportedly opened criminal investigation into cassava scientists just 1 week after neuroscientists alleged in an expose that the company's studies of the experimental Alzheimer's drugs, simifilam, appeared to include altered images. Now, with Alzheimer's disease, it deals with, of course, disease of the brain, and you're going to be dealing with before and after data, where you'll be looking at before and after MRIs of the brain or CT scans of the brain. And so there's an allegation that there were some altered images in the before and after. In response to the Reuters report, Remy Barbier, president of CL Cassava, said in a statement that no charges have been filed against the company and that allegations of research misconduct are false. Now, it's an interesting statement because to open an investigation, you may not necessarily file allegations. So what he's saying that there's been no formal civil suit filed in the court or no indictment filed in the court. So there's no formal allegations made. And so basically saying the research misconduct, the allegations are false. So that's, a denial there. Most recently, Matthew Scragg, MD, PhD, an Alzheimer's researcher with Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, alleged that in an expose in the journal Science that it appeared Cassava's research included altered or duplicated brain images that have appeared in dozens of journal articles supporting the efficacy of simifilam. Scragg filed a whistleblower's report with the National Institutes of Health, which has spent millions funding the drug's development. So now, this Dr. Scragg has whistleblowers protection. And so, that's protection against, the company coming against them, et cetera. And also, if there's money retrieved by the government, then the whistleblower will receive some of that. So there's an upside to the whistleblower being a whistleblower. And I'm not saying that's the motive of the whistleblower. I'm just saying that I just want to, get that understanding out there. And again, as more people sign on, we have an ongoing poll to vote. Number 1, if you have greater than 50% trust that the research by big pharma and big device is legitimate or not fraudulent, and 2, if you think less than 50% chance that you're confident that it's not fraudulent. So in other words, 2, you don't trust it. 1, you trust it. So let's vote. Don't vote. If you voted already, don't vote again. But anybody who's just checking in, not aware of what those votes are meaning, that's what we're voting on. So you have a whistleblower who's made these allegations. So that's brought about the Department of Justice created an act for them to now go and investigate. So there's a whistleblower report or allegation. Department of Justice now opening an investigation. And that's pretty much how it goes. Now, again, the whistleblower has certain protections and also is an upside for a whistleblower. but this investigation is not a major part of what I want to discuss, other than the fact that it raises the suspicion in this particular drug that is raised often and in many cases have been proven. And before we open the floor for discussion, what I want to do is go to, and I just pulled this other article about how Merck manipulated the science about the drug Vioxx. For instance, y'all remember the issue with Vioxx, or is that? There's a lot of drug issues out that I don't know about or remember, but I remember this one because I was one of an army of cardiologists asked to review, hundreds of pages of, hundreds of documents and articles and on the issue, and we were. There was a large law firm here in Houston, which I think is as a national firm, but I think we were on the defendant side back in the day before I was, wearing the white hat. But I guess I was wearing the white hat then too, but I just wasn't aware of all this bad stuff going on. So I guess I was working out of ignorance. Dr. Floyd's smiling there. But anyway, what happened then is that Merck eventually settled outside and paid tens of millions or maybe a few billions of dollars. But what they did, what was found, there were five tactics of business interests used in sideline science to deceive the public. So some of the things they did were, one, to increase the likelihood of FDA approval for the anti-inflammatory and arthritis drug Vioxx. The pharmaceutical giant Merck used flawed methodologies biased toward predetermined results to exaggerate the drug's positive effects. Now, let me just pause there. Now, this sentence, I think this sentence is a little bit of an understatement, largely because it says to increase the likelihood of FDA approval, they did, X, Y, and Z. One thing we have to understand is that the FDA receives a very large chunk of its budget from pharmaceutical and device companies. So big pharma essentially contributes a lot through fees and all of the other things. And so I've heard estimates around 40% of that budget. It could be more, it could be less, but a very significant chunk of the FDA's budget comes from the people whom they're regulating. So I want us to get a grip on that, because if I'm driving on the street and technically, I pay taxes, and so the police officers who work for me, I contribute to the taxes, but I'm not a sole or one of maybe 50 people who pay 40% of the income of all police officers. If I were, a recognizable person that paid 40% of the income of all police officers, then it'd be understandable that a police officer would stop me and recognize me as a contributor to their, income, and think twice before giving me a ticket or something like that. And I think it's this kind of environment that the FDA, who's policing big pharma, recognize that big pharma as a whole contributes greatly to their budget. So I think that's a backdrop we have to understand as we go through this. Now, so then in addition to that underlying fundamental backdrop, to increase the likelihood of FDA approval for anti-inflammatory drug Vioxx, they use flawed methodologies biased toward predetermined results. As part of the strategy, they manipulated the trial design by comparing the drug to naproxen, a pain reliever sold under brand names such as Aleve, rather than to a placebo. Now, if you take a new drug, and compare it to an old drug, there are benefits and there are pros and cons to that. The pros from the standpoint of the new drug is considered is that the old drug has side effects too. So if you have a new drug that works in a similar line of activity of biochemical pathways, then the side effects of the new drug could be very similar to the side effects of the old drug. So the increase in side effects or adverse reactions will be blunted because you got two active drugs that can cause problems. So that's a favorable part of comparing it to an old drug they could have side effects, maybe more side effects than the new drug, or as many. The potential negative aspect of the new drug, as we'll talk about here, is that the old drug may have some positive benefit that the new drug doesn't have. And as it turned out, the drug Vioxx is what we call a COX-2 inhibitor. It goes down one of the pathways of inhibiting anti-inflammatory or inflammatory reactions in the body's biochemistry, as opposed to having a balanced effect. You have COX-1 and COX-2. That's a very, very simplified explanation. Naproxen has a different mechanism. Naproxen behaves more like aspirin, and it has a pretty strong antiplatelet effect, and it's been found to reduce heart attack by 80%. Now, the interesting thing here is that Vioxx increased risk of heart attack by 400%. So when you compare it to a drug that decreased the risk of heart attack, and you have one that increased risk of heart attack, what they did, you would say, well, gosh, that seems like that would be bad, but they hid the data. The increased amount of heart attack data was hidden, and that the FDA just did not see that data, and also the science of reviewing just doesn't see the data. So essentially, hid the data. That's one, and then they upplayed the fact that naproxen decreased heart attack as a benefit of naproxen, but Vioxx did not, increase heart attack. So they hid the increase in heart attack in Vioxx and emphasized that naproxen decreased heart attacks where Vioxx didn't necessarily. So they kind of hid it by two ways. They also use a pattern of ghostwriting of scientific articles. So in documents reveal, so what ghostwriting is, you get somebody who writes. So basically you may have a staff person who's one of your hired writers, and they will simply get the data from the scientists, and then they would write according to what the executives want them to write. And so they'll write out the background, the results, and then the discussion, which is the most important part, which is the interpretation of the findings. And so you have the findings, you kind of manipulate the data, you leave out certain data points, and you have the findings that you want. You say, okay, we had a, increase in this or decrease in that, and the bad stuff you leave out so you don't make an interpretation on it. And that's essentially what was had here. But they also had employees who were writing the article. So they use ghostwriters, but they don't publish the name. So Jane Doe, who works for Merck, wrote the article. And Jane Doe is a great scientific writer. She's, maybe a master's degree, a PhD in scientific writing or whatever. And she's a Merck employee, as opposed to having an independent medical expert or scientific expert who reads the journal and interprets it and then comes up and writes based on their opinion. You have somebody who's hired by the company, who's writing what the company wants them to write. But they're not exposed, so hence the term ghost. They're the writer, but they're a ghost writer because their name is not on the paper. What they do is they go to institutions, medical institutions, and they get some of the leaders in their field, maybe leaders in the field of rheumatology or whatever the case is, and say, well, we want you to be, primary authors on this. They get paid money. They'll look at the data that's made available to them. That's not all the data there is, just the limited data. Then they'll look at the article and they'll just say, yes, you can put my name in this. If they disagree with the study that's done, the only thing they can do is just decline to be an author. They can't go out and publish anything against the company or anything like that. So they probably sign an NDA just to be able to look at the data. Internal documents revealed that 16 of 20 papers reporting on clinical trials of Vioxx, a Merck employee was initially listed as the lead author of the first draft. This is what I'm talking about. So they have one of the employees of the first draft. On published versions, an outside academic was listed as a primary author. So basically, before they get it published, as I said, they get an outside academic and say, okay, you can look at this. Do you agree? We'll pay you, $20,000 to put your name on the article. You don't have to do anything other than that. And your reputation, Dr. So-and-so, chairman of such and such department at such and such, prestige institution in the United States. And so they become the author. Then the other four external author was listed. So they still didn't disclose the name of the ghost author. Tragedy of Merck's manipulation of its data and the FDA's resulting approval of Vioxx in 1999 led to thousands of avoidable premature deaths and 100,000 heart attacks. The Senate Finance Committee said that the FDA's failure to recall Vioxx earlier, because they knew about these increased cardiovascular deaths, I think after maybe a couple of months after the publication, but they didn't recall it. They left it on the market. Their failure to recall it earlier when they knew about these findings resulted in as many as 55,000 premature deaths. So they knew about the increased deaths. They hid the data and did not act on the data. And they estimated 55,000 premature deaths of heart attacks and stroke were attributed to that negligence, calling the equivalent of allowing 2 to 4 jumbo jetliners to crash every week for 5 years. So what Merck did is they shot down 4 jumbo jetliners every week for 5 years. And they just got a slap on the wrist. So anyway, that's pretty much what I have in terms of the data. And what I'd like to do is get anybody and everybody's comments on this in terms of what your thoughts are. I have a few other comments, but I thought I'd just open the floor. Dr. Floyd, Dr. Celeste, and the members of the galley. Any questions or comments? And we got the bombshell question up front. Danielle says, my mom has Alzheimer's. She is not on any drugs. I just want to take a naturopathic approach. Okay, Danielle, good for you. Any thoughts?
We have 7 2s so far, so 0 1s.
7 2. So that's so we got 7 people distrusted. Nobody so far has expressed trust in it. And most of these votes came before I said anything, but I guess they probably probably knew where we were going to go anyway.
They probably watch your show.
Yeah, it kind of feels like our I hate to say our trust of science, but it seems like some of these companies, not naming anyone in particular, but they put things out knowing that there may be adverse effects, and just decide that they'll handle the consequences later. And that's not, I'm not talking about this particular study. It's just over the years when things happen, because we know they have a big bucket of money and they have lawyers and they will pay out. And that's what they've done over the years. And then they move on to the next drug that they put out. And it stays out for about 5 years. Then there's enough adverse effects that they say stop. Then the lawyers come along and say, if you've used this drug, give us a call. And then money is kind of dispersed between the lawyers, the drug companies. It just seems like something else bigger than what we get to see is going on behind the scenes, where they kind of know that these medications are not going to have an overall positive effect, but let's make our impact or our money for a certain period of time, and then it's pulled and moved to the next.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's certainly in their budgets, and as Pat Hylathrop said, they know it's going to take years to go through the court system. That's time they can be making money off of it. And even before you get a whistleblower, like they're aware of the data from the very end of the study, and they're able to hide the data and move forward with the drugs. And there is what I shared in the notes on this study. Also, I'm going to put in the banner, but I invite each of you to take a look at the best and worst of the medical industry. It's on the and how to know the difference. The Real Truth About Health is a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search The Real Truth About Health, and they have it's about 2 hours and 20 minutes long. So you may want to save it for when you have time or windshield time or whatever, just to listen. They have 4 experts, one of whom we had on our community, Dr. Yoho, talk about these issues. And I'll share some of my notes on the discussion. I listened to it earlier today. But the real truth about health, the best and worst of the medical industry. I didn't hear too much about the best. I heard mostly the worst, which is very daunting. But they talked about issues related to pharmaceutical drugs. Most of about 97% of the trials that are used for guidelines and dictation of how we practice are supported by private industry, by the pharmaceutical companies. About 97% they estimate, and so the vast majority of what influences how we practice medicine is dictated by pharmaceutical companies. The journals, like these elaborate, we used to, when I was in training, the New England Journal of Medicine, this big lofty journal. We thought, these guys, walking on the clouds, but you get lots of fraudulent research that gets published in New England Journal. This Vioxx study was published in New England Journal, and how the journals, the reviewers of the journal do not have all the data. The research is done by the big pharma companies. They do all the research, and they control all the data. They control the design of the study, et cetera. And then they control what data comes out, what gets published, and what doesn't get published. So when they go to the FDA doesn't see everything, or they don't see all of the nuances. When they publish the journal in the journal articles, the reviewers of the journal don't see all of the data. They see only what the pharmaceutical companies want them to see. And it's a positive study, gets published, and there's an incentive for the journals to publish that data because the journals then make a lot of money on reprint. So the drug companies will buy lots of reprint, and they will then save that money. And of course, that's a big part of their budget. Some people estimate it's about 40% of their budget as well. So there's a big incentive for them to publish these studies and get them on very quickly. I remember we were part of the drug Entresto, the study. In fact, our center, and this is, it was definitely more than 10 years, maybe 15 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't remember exactly when, but we were one of the lead sites for that. We enrolled probably 16, 17 years ago. We were starting to do some of our own detox research. But long story short, that study went on for about 4 or 5 years, and they finally found the positive findings, compared it to not placebo, but ACE inhibitor. And so when they found the positive finding, they shut down all the sites real quickly, sent all the site monitors to go and get all of our supplies, the data, all that. It was all crunched rapidly. It was in the New England Journal within, I think, weeks of the sites being closed down, which was in time for the next main ACC meeting. It was presented at one of the major presentations of the ACC meeting. And of course, they pay, tens of millions of dollars for all of this to the American College. And then within, I think, less than a year or a year and a half, it was part of our guidelines in terms of a class 2 indication for treating people with heart failure. Now, I'm not saying the drug's bad or whatever, but I'm just sort of sharing that experience from the insider's view in terms of how fast, these things get pushed through. And it goes through that quickly because of the influence they have, the monetary influence they have of all the institutions. They essentially control those. They control the FDA. They control the major medical journals. They control the medical institutions. If you go, I remember in 2017, we presented a poster at the American Heart Association. Our institution did, so I was there, and I took my son with me because he was at Oxford. I was in Anaheim, California, where the ACC was, the AHA was, and so, I picked him up in Pasadena. We drove down, and I got him a day's pass. I walked him through the exhibit hall and said, "Look, you have exhibits that are worth, millions of dollars. These are exhibits that are worth more than most people's homes are." And they build them up and take them down. But that's big pharma is paying for all of the research and the studies that's done, and so it's completely biased. It's completely, open and understood. So even if you said if it's on the up and up, it's very suspicious that you have people that are biased toward getting a drug approved, controlling the data for that drug, and then controlling what dictates how we practice. Any other comments from my colleagues?
Well, yeah, I just have to agree with the same thing. I've had a similar experience where we participated in a trial at one point to have a publication about an IV antibiotic and how it's effective against I guess the leading brand at the time. It was a drug. I'm not going to call the name because it was on the market for such a short time anyway. But we reported research and showed that the drug they were comparing it to, the other IV antibiotic, was less effective, or equal or less effective. It wasn't more effective. And so we thought that it was good research data and it would be published and show what happened. But of course, the company got our data back. They collected everything, like you said, and they put it in a file cabinet. They suppressed it. We never heard anything about it. Never saw the research we did. I mean, we went through the whole publication process, and they had it ready to publish, but they never made a journal. It just got buried after that. So I would agree that with the way Big Pharma handles everything, and they have a regimen. I think they go through the process of doing all the research, determine what outcomes they want to see with the drug, determine where they want to go and what they want to see, and they do the data, and then they leave it to their marketing team, or like you said, these researchers to make the data fit the parameters to be able to market it. And so, unfortunately, that's bad for the patients who take it or who depend on it to be an effective medication, and so they lose out. And again, yeah, they calculate how much money they're going to make, like Dr. Palmer said. The unfortunate with Vioxx, and I do remember that because that was the anti-inflammatory drug, and I was at one time back in my practice, I used a lot of the anti-inflammatories, the naproxens, the Feldines, proposicams, and those drugs. And Vioxx came out, and we thought it was an answer to the other problems with the other drugs. And I think it was on the market maybe less than a couple of years before we started hearing that it was a problem. I don't think I ever used it. I did use it a few times, but not too many times because because of the information that was coming out. But
you're welcome to plead the fifth on that one.
What's that?
You're welcome to plead the fifth on that one.
Well, I was ignorant of the law. I didn't know, which is not an excuse for that's not a criminal defense. But the drug, that strategy works good for pharmaceutical companies as long as it's not lethal, people don't die. And then, unfortunately, with the case of Vioxx, you had 55,000 people die, so that it didn't work out well for them as far as the payout. But on the other drugs where they have adverse reactions that are not lethal, they take the risk. They say, we'll do it and we'll ride this, as long as they could and they'll set aside, 10% of their profit to pay the lawyers, and lawyers get 50 to 60% of whatever those settlements, and the people get whatever's left over.
But the death issue, the death toll is really hard to calculate. I mean, clearly in Vioxx, it was easy to sort of create some aspects of proximate cause, but because the increase in heart attacks and stroke was very early on, after the onset of using the drug. I remember looking at that data, and I saw that not only with the COX-2 inhibitors, but also the COX-1 inhibitors had increased there. So drugs like ibuprofen that we've been using for many years that had already gone generic, these drugs were also shown to have increased deaths and heart attack and stroke. And so, but they were after Vioxx at the time, and so they didn't really take a look at all the other drugs, which again, stuck under the radar when they were in their form of brand name and branding. And so when there's no incentive, it's generics. And I guess it's harder for the lawyers to sort of go after everybody making a generic drug. I'm not sure. But, and the pockets may not be as deep or well-defined, if you will. But clearly with Vioxx, you can easily demarcate the deaths and maybe similar drugs. The other problem with drugs in general, as you say, they have adverse reaction that we can detect early on. But I see patients who are on polypharmacy for a prolonged period of time, and so either individually or collectively, these drugs have an adverse effect that, in my opinion, lead to the early demise of many people who are taking them. And so, it's one thing to say, okay, yeah, this one drug or whatever, these, drug companies are found time after time to have these fraudulent outcomes. But I think if you step back and just look at it, more fundamentally, and I think, we do that anyway, if you think of any pharmacological agent, is not a natural chemical for the body to ingest. And so with that understanding, you really need to have a very, very high threshold for the ingestion of any, pharmacological agent or something that's not natural beyond the food. And so, that's really my take on it, because you all of these things have the ability to cause harm and either premature demise if taken over a long period of time. And so, I try to share with my patients, it's important to, if you're on a medication, it should be temporary. You should be working very hard at your lifestyle to avoid the need of it. Now, there's some situations that require long-term use of medication for various reasons. And I won't delineate those, but I like for us all to step back and say, well, all of these drugs, at the very least, are not natural for the body to ingest. And so with that fundamental thing, even though you can, cover up a symptom, you're not necessarily treating an underlying cause.
Yeah. And I would just want to add to that, because, and people hopefully understand that, the body is a complete biochemical process. I mean, the biochemistry and the biology of how it works, every cycle or system in the body has to work together. And when you have a drug that's called an inhibitor that inhibits a pathway or blocks a pathway, people have to understand that when you block one pathway, you're stopping other processes from working. So that's where the adverse reactions and the side effects come in, because you can pinpoint one particular problem, but you create many, many more by doing that. That's a difficult way. Whereas when we talk about food, again, that's a more natural way, because your body can take what it needs to do the job it needs to do. And I'm just piggybacking on what you said, that people need to understand that that's not the solution. That even when you take medication, it may have a temporary fix, it may get you through a rough time, but it's not something that the body can deal with for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think I agree 100%. And the part about the food, it needs to be not unprocessed, as natural plant foods in as close as natural state as possible is my take on these things. Dr. Palmer, yes.
And quickly. And some of that is our fault. I mean, the doctors, for example, in my world, in pediatrics, a lot of times children will get fevers, which is natural. But we have parents so afraid of fever that, in the recommendation when they call in is alternate, antipyretics. So the acetaminophen and the ibuprofen alternated back and forth. And so now parents are starting to do this very early, using these medications whenever they feel, it might not even really be a fever, but whenever they feel that the child is warm. And so we are definitely, parents are doing it themselves, but then their physicians are giving them the recommendation to do it too. And so, I guess that's why we try to talk to the public and try to talk to our patients about when and when not to jump to medication. I mean, for us, we don't want to ever jump to medication, but when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we use I may have mentioned it before, but our concept is pharmaceuticals as a foundation, nutraceuticals as needed, and pharmaceuticals as a last resort. And so I think that's the way we should think of it, because and And again, all of us need to work hard to make those progressive changes in our lifestyle to get away from the need of these pharmaceutical agents. There is a number of people that looked at the statin data, and you look at meta-analysis of a lot of controlled trials, and I think the data show that the increase in lifespan was only about 4 days, over a period of years that you treat someone with the statins. And so I think you had to have maybe 40 or 80 people to be treated to prevent one. Uh, 40 people over 5 years had to be treated to prevent a heart attack, and 80 people over 5 years had to be treated to prevent one death. But the overall survival benefit against nothing, it was, I think, 4 days. Now, that's not people going on a plant-based diet, exercising, and doing all the right things that they can do. And statin drugs decreases mostly the large buoyant LDL molecules, which are the least harmful. The small LDL particles are the ones that are most harmful. And those we do know are decreased with nutrition, particularly plant-based diet nutrition. So that's something that we've seen in our regimen that makes a difference. And then Anne makes a great point. It depends on how plant-based is being done.
She's responding to Misty. So Misty Turner had a question for you.
Oh, when someone starts getting plant-based, how long does it take the patient? Okay, is being overweight take longer? Low blood pressure? Ask for a friend. Asking for a friend. Okay, everybody's always asking for a friend.
That's good. Friends will be healthy.
So Ann answer that in general. Anyone y'all want to expound on that to any degree? I looked past the question and got to the answer first. So getting started on plant-based, we see that in the order of days to weeks, you can see results of improvement on a minimally processed. Some people refer to as raw. We have a food level 0 to 4B, but foods that are not heated or heated only up to low temperatures, we see very rapid decreases in it. As being overweight take longer to lower blood pressure, really, it does not. We've seen in our data and over a long period we published on it that the change in blood pressure and the change in weight is not tightly linked, especially once you get about 2 or 3 weeks out. So I think, what we found, what we've seen in our data, scientific data, is that reduction in blood pressure is independent of reduction in weight. And we see that in thin people who lose blood pressure decrease drastically with very minimal weight loss. So that's not, and you see people with, greater percentage of weight loss and even greater percentage of blood pressure reduction and vice versa. So in our data, we haven't seen a tight correlation with weight loss and blood pressure reduction.
And I guess we've seen the same thing that you're saying also. We do our 40-day detox. The first 2 weeks is 80% raw plant-based, and that's what really makes a difference. It's not so much, what the weight is, where they start, but within days to weeks, you'll see blood pressure come down. That's one of the first things you see happen when you do that raw plant-based diet. And I have to emphasize that raw is a key factor. And I don't have a publication on it. Nobody's done the research on it, but I'm certain, just based on our experience over years of doing this, that the processed food, the chemicals in processed food, whether it's sodium benzoate or whether it's a preservative, artificial colors, flavors, dyes, artificial sweeteners, all of these things are the I think the chemicals that contribute to stimulating blood pressure. So when you take those out of the diet, not only the food helps, but the chemicals in the processed foods are the worst part. It's not just, if you could have a processed food that was apple that was dehydrated, it was minimally processed, it wouldn't cause a change. But if you took that apple and you put sweeteners in it or made it into applesauce and did it that way, you get a different result. So again, not going raw is a key factor, and plant-based is another one. Animal products we have people who have been raw for a matter of weeks, and if they go back to eating animal products within days, their blood pressure within hours, within the next meal, their blood pressure is up back into an abnormal range.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Dr. Palmer, here's a question for you. I know you saw it.
Yeah, the thing is, it feels like, I'm not going to say another medicine because I don't think that there is, but it feels like sometimes the temperature pushes up because we keep suppressing it when it's low. So if we let the 99s and 100 do what they're supposed to do and not suppress it when it's low, then the body will not have to continue to push it higher to heal itself. Because most of the time, for example, when you have a virus, we're not giving you medication for a virus. So we have to depend on the immune system to do its work. But then we use these medications which suppress the fever, which is your immune system doing its work. And so I feel like if we let the 99s and 100s and maybe 101s do what they do, but then we have to not be fearful of fever. I know what the average person thinks. Their child is going to have a seizure and they're going to have long-term defects from having a seizure. Febrile seizures do occur. They occur in a certain age group. It usually is not as a result of having high fevers. Febrile seizures can also happen at 99. It can happen at 104s. But, we've been kind of in a space where even our colleagues, kind of get excited when the temperature is 104. And that is, of course, not ideal, but we have to stop and think. So some things to do when the temperature is 99, do cooling things on the outside. Of course, do not put the baby in or the child in a cold bath. I think people used to do that back in the day. That's not what I'm recommending. But maybe get a cool cloth and put it across their forehead. Maybe get a cool cloth and put it around the neck, put it under the arms, put it at the legs. Just put it in places to kind of keep the body cool. Not cold, but just cool down. Also, keeping the child hydrated. Making sure they're drinking water, maybe some broth, keeping the body hydrated because that helps with the flow of the blood flow. And if we're taking any supplements, because that's a whole different discussion, then maybe sometimes the temperature will not have to go as high to heal. The temperature is going high to get the blood flowing to heal the body. So the idea is more so to see where it's going. And then I tell parents also, if the baby is sleeping at night and is comfortable, children, I'm not just talking about babies, but also children, let them sleep, because what's happening at night is the temperature is going up. It's just that you're asleep. And so now the body's like, phew, I can finally heal myself because you let me alone. So I tell the parents, relax. If the baby's sleeping and they're comfortable, or the child is sleeping and comfortable, let them sleep. I know that the temperature is going up. I tell the parents that the temperature is going to go up. Do not get upset about that. In the morning, the temperature will likely break, and then the baby or the child will start to get better. But they have to be comfortable with the child mounting a fever, because this is how all of our immune systems are supposed to work.
Gotcha. Now, there's febrile seizures. What's the horse versus the cart? Is it the fever? I think you were alluding to that in your comments, but is it necessary that the fever is causing the seizure, or there's something else causing the seizure and it's just happen to be associated with the fever? Because if you get fevers at 99 versus 104, it seems like that's a broad spectrum of temperatures.
So febrile seizures is one of those that kind of is still a lot of information needs to be studied and understood about what it is. Of course, if we can identify a reason for it, they have an infection somewhere or something else is going on, that's different. But some children just have a febrile seizure and they have it one time and they never have it again. They don't have anything else going on. It just kind of something sparks and sets it off. So I don't know. I don't know that there's been enough research to say exactly what causes febrile seizures.
The overall prognosis is good.
Yes. Yeah.
So basically, you support them during the seizure, and there's not really much else.
No, I mean, sometimes depending on, I remember when I was training, I don't know if this is still the case, they said that everybody gets one seizure. So your first, I don't know if they still do it like that, because I see now people are going to neurology. A lot of times they'll go to neurology, they'll get the EEG and say everything is normal. And then, all boxes are checked and it's done. But back in the day, we used to say everybody gets one seizure. And then if you have another one, then we go to neurology to make sure that we don't have a seizure disorder or something else trying to present itself.
Gotcha. Okay. Good point. Thanks for helping with that, because that's I didn't know you had febrile seizure at 99, and I always was under the impression that was associated with the high temperatures, but in the temperature at 99, you would think that's something else causing it. So that's a great discussion there. Any other thoughts on this, comments on this topic? No more questions here, but again, it's what we have to do is have a healthy sense of cynicism, is the way I would like to put it, toward pharmaceutical agents that are being recommended, and so I think we just have to use them cautiously as doctors, and of course as patients. I think we have to educate ourselves, not only looking at shows like this, but The Real Truth About Health. I think that show would be an excellent one to listen to get a good background in terms of where the science is coming from for these drugs. And they're not well tested. I mean, I can just give it a summary. These drugs are not well studied. The science is much of the science is biased, especially the science that's promoted by big pharma. And their big incentive is to improve the well-being of the shareholders of the company, and not necessarily the well-being of the patients who are being prescribed these drugs. I mean, it's an unfortunate thing, but it's a reality that we have to, become aware of, and we have to stand up and be brave enough to admit that that's what's going on. Any other thoughts? Someone asked about 12-year-old, when should fever meds be given? You're getting a lot of PD questions.
I mean, there is no number. The older children, sometimes a 12-year-old is not technically a teenager, but sometimes in my teenagers who, they can verbally tell you how they're feeling. And so, the question is, if you're 101, how are you feeling?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a headache? What else is going on? So, that's a different discussion, because now I can actually ask you what is going on. It's very rare. I don't think I've ever seen a 12-year-old who doesn't have a seizure disorder have a febrile seizure. So that is outside of the age group where we run into febrile seizures in children. So that's not really on the table. Now, if you have a seizure disorder, that's different. That can set off your seizures. But so now you're talking about a 12-year-old who can tell you how they're feeling, if they have a headache, if this is hurting, if that is hurting. And so, I feel more comfortable with saying, especially if it's 101, just do the same thing. Cool cloth, go lay down, hydration. My older teenagers, I tell them to actually, let's do what we used to do back in the day, put on some sweats, put on a sweatshirt, put on sweatpants, and sweat it out. You're going to be uncomfortable, but when you wake up the next morning, you're going to feel like a brand new person. So because now you've allowed the body to heat up and do what it needs to do overnight, and by morning it would have healed. Because we, like Dr. Montgomery, like you and I have talked about, sleeping is the body's way of healing. It heals. So if we just lay down and I'm saying to put on the heavier things to heat up the body a little bit more. Yes, it is uncomfortable. A 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, 16-year-old can say, you know what, I did this for 5 hours. I'm taking these clothes off now. So that's why I like to say that to the older children, because they can tell you, okay, this is my limit and I'm taking it off now. Okay, that's fine, but you did it for 5 hours. So, these are the type of things that you can do with older children. I wouldn't recommend that with younger children who can't communicate how they're feeling with you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the hydration, I think, is key because it lets you sweat, perspire more, which helps you cool off as well.
Yes.
And so that's a great point. Yeah, I never thought of the warm clothes, or maybe even warm blankets, even, right?
Yeah, anything that heat the body up. I mean, and full disclaimer, I've done it myself, and it feels horrible. But the next day, you start feeling better faster.
Yeah, I can do the warm blankets. I can throw them off fast if I can't tolerate. So it's those warm ups off and stuff. No, that's great. Great comment. So, what caused a crook in the neck? I'm going to get last question. What caused a crook in the neck? That's yours, Dr. Floyd Atkins. That's a musculoskeletal issue there.
I don't know. Number one cause of crook in the neck is stress. So if you're stressing, you need to do stress reduction, stress relaxation, because there usually is a tension in the cervical area.
Yeah.
So
yeah, good point.
Other than that, you can call your neurologist. I don't know.
Yeah. It's probably akin to like tension headaches and things like that, musculoskeletal type things.
Isn't it like a muscle spasm?
Yeah. It's a spasm. Malpositioning can be associated with, a lot of people associate malpositioning of the neck while sleeping and things like that. It's really neuromuscular. So stress could be related. A lot of things that cause the chemical imbalance of the body.
I think
musculoskeletal and all of that.
Being imbalance.
Yeah. So
green smoothies may help.
Huh?
I said green smoothies and a heating pad may help.
Yeah, and eating straight. Well, thanks, colleagues and friends. Thanks a bunch, guys. Dr. Palmer, Dr. Atkins, I appreciate it as always. It's always a pleasure. And I'll close up and I'll see you guys backstage. Hold on a second here. And as usual, I always learn a lot tonight. And thank you for your questions and your insight. But this is a very important topic. It's one that we really need to take heed, and it's one that I wish I had more notice given, because I think it's important that we understand what's the source of information from our healthcare professionals. When we go and see a physician, I'm not trying to be critical of my colleagues. I practice in the field, I do prescribe medications, but we have to understand that the science behind this so-called evidence-based medicine is at the very least tainted by pharmaceutical companies, device companies, who have a primary responsibility for economic growth and revenue gain for their stockholders. And so with that, primary desire, primary emphasis and motivation, we have to, clearly be aware of that and take that under consideration whenever we're considering some form of treatment with a medicine or device. Now, having said that, there are benefits to the devices. There can be benefits with medications. I've used them over the years, but we have to have a healthy sense of skepticism, and we have to be willing to work. And a lot of it's on us. It's easy to point the fingers on someone else. You bad pharmaceutical companies, you bad device companies, you bad doctors. But ultimately, the responsibility is on us as individuals, individually and collectively, to be very diligent and work very hard to do everything we can to optimize our health in a natural way, to minimize or eliminate the potential need for these agents. So that's what I have for you tonight. Thank you for joining us. Hit the like button, share, subscribe, and until next time, keep it fresh, natural, and live.